Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly through the crooked, rain-slick streets of a medieval village just before sunrise. The roofs sag under the weight of fog. Smoke curls slowly from low chimneys, trying not to wake the dawn. Your feet are bare, because naturally your boots were stolen last week, and the dirt road is already mushy. You move fast, though, not because you're scared, but because a woman's labor doesn't wait for sunrise. You are a midwife. You don't have a title. You don't carry a license. You don't even have a fixed home, really. But people knock on your door anyway, sometimes in the middle of the night, other times just after the rooster shrieks like he's possessed. Someone is always in labor. Someone is always scared, and someone always expects you to know what to do. It's funny because you don't always know. Not really. You learned by watching your grandmother. She smelled like juniper and told you that babies came out easier if you rubbed nettle on your wrists. You've never found proof of this, but you still do it, just in case. So tonight, or rather this very early morning, you're walking toward a woman's house. She's young, maybe on her first child. Or maybe her third. You didn't ask. You just heard the knock. Grabbed your pouch of herbs, a flask of mead, and your candle stub, and slipped out without a word. The fog kisses your cheeks like a soft thread. The silence is only broken by the occasional snort of a pig or a splash from your own foot hitting a puddle. A few doors creak as you pass. Someone's always watching. They know where you're going. They don't say anything. Some cross themselves, others mutter. One old man even pretends to spit. Classic. There's always suspicion and there's fear too. Not of you, well, okay, a little of you, but mostly of what you represent. Blood, screaming, and the razor-thin chance that the woman might die. Because childbirth in the Middle Ages wasn't what you'd call a peaceful affair. The average woman gave birth 5 to 7 times in her life. Many of them didn't make it past the 4th. So yeah, when you show up, people light candles, not to help you see, but to beg God not to take her. You finally reach the door. It's slightly open already. That's custom. The doorway must never block a new soul's passage into the world. Inside, the fire is barely alive, casting the room in long, flickering shadows. A man stands to the side, awkward, half-dressed, red-eyed, useless. You nod. He backs away. And then you enter the birthing room. It smells like tallow and sweat and something sharp. Fear, maybe. The woman is groaning, her head lolling as her body tries to do what it was never truly designed to do easily. Her mother is there, whispering prayers. Another woman, neighbor maybe, fans her with a piece of bread crust. You don't ask. Your candle goes in the corner, your bag beside it. You kneel down, feel her belly, check the position. It's not ideal, but not deadly yet. You whisper something to her, something your grandmother used to say. It's half blessing, half threat. Bring her down whole, or I'll never speak to you again. You're talking to the baby. They're the real decision maker here. Historical fact time. Did you know that medieval people actually understood positioning in childbirth better than we assume? The birthing stool was designed to keep gravity on your side. Some women gave birth upright, even squatting. Lying on your back came later, thanks to royal nonsense and fancy furniture. So yes, in this moment, you're setting her up on a stool, not a bed. Now, for the weird tidbit, in some regions, people believe tying knots anywhere in the room could tie the womb and delay labor. That meant no one could wear tied shoes or even have knotted hair during the birth. So naturally, you check everyone's feet. Untie those laces, Agnes. Time passes differently in labor. Sometimes a minute is an hour. Sometimes an hour is a blink. You offer her herbs. You rub oil on her back. You tell her to breathe. Not that she listens. You swat away a man who pokes his head in and asks if she's done yet. He's lucky your hands are busy. Then come the sounds. You never get used to them. Screams, guttural roars. At one point she laughs, and it's terrifying. Pain does that. The mother next to you starts reciting the Lord's Prayer. You join in because why not? Superstition is half the job. So is faith, and this woman needs all of it. Here's something that'll keep you up. Some scholars believe midwives are often the only medical practitioners women ever saw in their lifetimes. That means you, not the local priest, not the traveling leech seller. You are her only shot at surviving this. No pressure. You reach between her legs, fingers guided by years of guesswork and hope. The baby is close. You encourage her, not with words, but with your eyes. She knows. She pushes. One push, two. Then that sound, the one that always makes your chest tighten and your eyes sting. A cry. High, squalling, alive. The baby is here. It's a girl. You clean her off with a bit of wool, wrap her in linen that smells like rosemary, and lay her gently on her mother's chest. The room is suddenly quiet. Even the fire seems to stop crackling. You check for tearing. There's some. You do your best. You whisper apologies. She smiles at you anyway. Her skin is pale, but she's here. They're here. The mother's mother hugs you like you're her own daughter. The neighbor offers you a heel of bread. The husband peeks in and cries, which is unexpected. You allow it. Before you leave, you sprinkle holy water around the room, not because you have to, but because you want to. Babies come into this world with nothing but screams. They deserve at least some protection. You step back into the fog. Your feet are cold again. Your candle stub is almost gone, but the world is a little warmer, a little louder, because a girl just entered it. Red-faced, furious, and very much alive. You'll do this again tomorrow, or tonight. Probably tonight. That's the job. That's the calling. And as the first church bell rings out over the misty rooftops, you walk on, quiet, invisible, vital. So you think midwives just show up when the baby's halfway out and yell, "Push!" like it's some medieval football chant? Yeah, no. The reality is far less glamorous, far more exhausting, and, spoiler alert, includes absolutely zero coffee breaks. Being a medieval midwife means you're not just a baby catcher. You're a walking pharmacy, a therapist, a surgeon, an herbalist, a priest in a pinch, and sometimes an impromptu undertaker. Fun times. Your day starts early, not with birdsong, those little beasts are lying to you, but with frantic banging on your door. A husband who can't make eye contact tells you his wife is in pain. You pack your kit. Linen cloths, a few bundles of dried herbs, a jar of goose grease. Don't ask. And whatever coin or stale bread someone paid you with last week. And you're off again. But birth isn't all you're called for. Some women ask you for help before they even conceive. Yes, medieval fertility consulting was real. You'd get requests for womb-warming teas, conception pillows, and on one unforgettable occasion, a charm that involved burying a chicken bone under the bed. No one knows why. You didn't ask. When a woman is nearing her due date, you make house visits. You check her belly with gentle hands. No instruments, no measurements, just feel, intuition, and the occasional, that's new. If the baby seems too high, you'll recommend squatting exercises. Too low, and you'll rub her back with mustard seed oil. Breech? That's where it gets tricky. You might try turning the baby manually. Yes, with your hands inside her. No gloves, no anesthetic. Just whispered prayers and a deep breath. Historical fact interlude. Many midwives knew how to detect a breech position by feeling the baby's head and limbs through the belly. This Leopold's maneuver, as it was later called, was used long before it had a fancy German name. Who needs titles when you have instinct and guts? Now let's talk about birth support. You stay with a laboring woman for hours, sometimes a full day, sometimes more. You soothe, you distract, you brace her feet, you braid her hair if it keeps falling in her eyes, you hold her hand until she nearly breaks it, you tell jokes, sing hymns, and yes, you lie when necessary. "You're almost there" becomes your go-to phrase when she's not even close. And then there are the unpredictable jobs. Once you helped deliver twins, something so rare that the priest insisted you were either blessed or cursed. The second baby came out not crying but staring. You gave it a pinch. It cried. Everyone breathed again. Another time you dealt with a stillbirth. The room went silent except for the mother's sobs and your own heartbeat pounding in your ears. You cleaned the child, wrapped it gently, said a prayer even if no one asked you to. You stayed long after the others left. Strange tidbit incoming. In parts of medieval France, midwives carried a special spoon. Yes, a spoon, meant to help remove the placenta if it refused to come out. Picture it, a worn wooden tool, polished smooth from decades of use. No one knows who invented it. Some say it was passed down from midwife to midwife like a holy relic. And now for our scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether most midwives were truly trusted professionals or merely tolerated out of necessity. Some believe midwives had a respected place in their communities, especially in towns where no male doctors would touch childbirth. Others claim they were seen more as a last resort, respected in fear rather than admiration. The truth? Probably somewhere in the middle, much like everything else in medieval life. Back to your daily grind. Sometimes you're called post-birth to check on the new mother. You inspect her healing wounds, apply salves made from marigold and beeswax, and scold her gently for standing too soon. You ask if she's bleeding too much. You ask if she's sleeping. You ask if she feels off. And yes, postpartum depression existed. It wasn't called that, but you recognize the symptoms. You'd find a mother staring at the wall, eyes glassy, ignoring her child. You'd sit beside her, hand her a honeyed drink, and talk about anything but the baby. Sometimes that helped, sometimes it didn't, but you stayed. You help with nursing too. Some babies won't latch. You try different positions, massage the mother's breasts with warm cloths, and offer a bit of fennel tea. You might even feed the child yourself if the mother's milk hasn't come in. That happened more than once. You didn't mind. You understood that nourishment didn't care whose body it came from. And, abortions? Yes, they existed, quietly, carefully. You knew the herbs. Pennyroyal, mugwort, rue. You never called it that. You'd say things like, bring on a late moon, or clean the womb. It was dangerous for her and for you, but you did it anyway, especially when the girl looked no older than your niece with panic written all over her face. Let's not forget about miscarriages. You'd sit with women who bled out their hope into dirty straw and couldn't stop shaking. You'd burn sage, whisper over their stomachs, and clean up what no one else dared touch. You never judged, not once, because life in those times was always hanging by a thread, and no one deserved cruelty on top of grief. What about payment? Sometimes you got a few coins, usually not. More often it was eggs, a crust of bread, or a half skin of ale. One woman gave you a scarf that smelled like goat, and you wore it for 3 winters. Another offered a song. You accepted it with a bow. The work never ended. Between births, you foraged herbs, dried them, labeled them with charcoal symbols only you could read. You restocked your cloths, boiled your tools, and mended your cloak for the 50th time. You rehearsed spells and prayers not because you believed them, but because sometimes words were all you had. You're tired. You're always tired. But when someone shouts your name in the street, it's not because they're accusing you. Not this time. It's because a child you helped deliver 5 winters ago is now learning to walk. And their mother wants you to see. So you do. And you smile. Not because it's easy, not because it pays, but because somehow your hands, these old, cracked, blessed, and cursed hands, have helped carry the world forward one life at a time. That's what you actually do all day. It's the middle of the night, and you're hovering over a laboring mother who hasn't stopped praying for 4 hours straight. Not to you, of course. She's praying to St. Margaret, patron saint of childbirth, because someone told her Margaret once burst out of a dragon's belly unharmed and that this somehow applies. Medieval logic, baby. You're not here to argue. You nod along, sprinkle a little extra holy water on her forehead, and tuck a charm under her pillow, a scrap of parchment with a hastily written prayer. She doesn't know it's also stained with fennel oil. That's for the swelling, but hey, double duty. The truth is religion is everywhere in your work. Not because you're particularly pious, though you can recite half the Psalms backwards if needed, but because childbirth is one of the few times regular people brush up against the divine, and they're terrified. Death feels close, and so they hope does God. And what they're most afraid of is not pain. It's not even dying. It's the baby dying before baptism. Oh, because that's where things get complicated. You've seen it happen. A child is born, doesn't cry, doesn't move. Maybe its lungs never drew breath. Maybe the cord was wrapped too tightly. Maybe it just wasn't meant to stay. But if the baby hasn't been baptized, hasn't been touched with that little sprinkle of holy water, you can almost feel the grief snap into something sharper, guilt, panic, a kind of spiritual horror. In the Middle Ages, people believed unbaptized babies went to limbo, a kind of celestial waiting room, not quite hell, but not heaven either. And for a grieving mother, that was worse than anything you could say. Her baby soul floating somewhere, forever unheld. So what do? You improvise. Historical fact alert. In many regions, midwives were given limited authority by the church to baptize newborns in emergencies. It wasn't official, it wasn't celebrated, but it was tolerated, because babies were dying all the time and priests were often hours or days away. So you, the humble, exhausted midwife, were given the sacred power to whisper the Latin words and drizzle water across a tiny brow. You didn't need a silver font. A bowl of clean rainwater would do. In one desperate case, you baptized a child using milk. Probably not canonical, but the mother said she felt peace afterward. There's a story that still sits heavy in your chest. You were called to a birth in the next village. It took you half a day to get there, and when you arrived, the woman was already pale, her eyes glassy. The baby was halfway delivered, silent. You rushed, you caught, you pressed, but the baby never breathed, and the family, instead of mourning quietly, turned to you and begged, "Just say the words, please, save her soul." So you did, even though the water was dirty, even though your voice shook, even though you weren't sure if it counted. You said the words, and they wept like she'd been brought back to life. Now for your weird tidbit. In some areas of Europe, parents would name their baby only after baptism. Until then, it was simply the child. That meant that if it died unbaptized, it was mourned as an anonymous soul. Some midwives quietly gave names anyway, just in case someone in heaven needed to know what to call them. Let's take a quick detour to those little prayer scrolls you always carry. Some scholars debate their origin. Were they part of ancient folk tradition or just poor man's theology? No one's quite sure. What you know is this. People believed that tying a scroll to a laboring woman's wrist would protect her from the devil, demons, or wandering spirits that might try to steal her baby. Yes, steal. Because, of course, medieval people thought birth was a supernatural battlefield. You've had women ask if they should place a knife under the bed to scare away witches. You've had mothers cry because someone made eye contact with them during pregnancy, and now they're cursed. And you've quietly brushed salt around the door frame, not because you believe it, but because they do. And belief is powerful, but back to God. You sometimes wonder what he thinks of all this, of your hands catching life, of your whispered half-prayers, of the messy, bleeding reality of birth. You've never seen an angel descend in the birthing chamber, no glowing halos, no heavenly choirs. But once, in the deep stillness after a successful birth, when the baby was latched and the mother smiling, you thought you heard something, a note of music maybe, or just the wind. There's another angle to all this, guilt, not yours, the mother's, because if anything goes wrong, if the child is stillborn, if the cord wraps twice instead of once, if the placenta won't detach, you know who they blame? Themselves. You've heard the sobs. God is punishing me. It's because I didn't fast last Lent. I said something cruel when I was pregnant. You try to comfort them. You say, it's not your fault. But they rarely believe you. The church didn't help much. Priests preached that childbirth pain was Eve's curse, that women suffered because of original sin, that the screaming, the tearing, the fever, it was holy penance. That's not theology. That's cruelty wrapped in robes. But here's something curious. Some monasteries kept logs of birth outcomes in their communities. And those records, when you look close, suggests that midwives, despite all odds, had decent success rates, which means either you're a miracle worker or God's been quietly on your side the whole time. Now for our scholarly disagreement. Historians still argue whether midwives in rural areas leaned more toward folk healing or church doctrine. Were they secretly pagans, using ancient charms and whispered spells? Or were they devout women, shaped entirely by Christianity? The truth is, most were both. Faith and folklore danced together in your hands like threads in a tapestry, messy, tangled, and inseparable. Sometimes when a child was born, sickly or deformed or different, families came to you for answers. Was it a punishment, a test, a sign? You never said yes. Instead, you wrapped the baby warmly, placed it in its mother's arms, and said, "This one has been chosen for a harder path." It didn't change anything, but it helped. Once a woman refused to baptize her stillborn baby, said she didn't want to mock God. That night you returned alone, crept into the house, whispered the words over that tiny body anyway. You lit a candle and left it burning beside the cradle, not because it would change anything, but because you needed to. Because your heart had learned to carry not just living infants, but the weight of lost ones too. And because somewhere, in all the flickering candles and crumbling theology, you still believed in grace. That maybe, just maybe, every soul gets home in the end. Even the smallest ones, even the unnamed, even the ones no one else remembers. You'd think catching babies for a living would make you popular. You'd think being the person who stops women from bleeding out in their own beds, who whispers blessings over new life, who holds hands when pain turns to panic. You'd think that would earn you a little respect. But no, sometimes it just earns you suspicion, and it starts, predictably, with the church. Now don't get it twisted. Officially, midwives were considered a necessary part of society. The church didn't come out and say, "We hate these women who keep everyone from dying." That would be bad PR. But they did start to squint a little too closely when midwives started getting good at what they did. Too good. It wasn't uncommon for a local priest, especially one with zero knowledge of childbirth, to question why a woman had survived a particularly risky labor. Did she call on the Virgin Mary? He'd ask. Or something else? Something else, of course, being code for magic. You've heard it all. She knew the baby would be breech before it even came out. She used herbs to stop the bleeding. Real herbs. She muttered something in Latin while rubbing rosemary on the floorboards. Look, first of all, you do know some Latin. It's not your fault the priest forgot half his psalms. Second, yes, you used herbs. Because bleeding is not a spiritual problem, it's a blood problem. But try explaining that to a monk who thinks female bodies are basically sin in a skin sack. Historical fact incoming. During the 13th and 14th centuries, church councils began regulating midwifery more closely, especially after medical universities started popping up. Universities that, of course, didn't allow women. Male doctors began gaining authority, and suddenly women who'd been safely delivering babies for generations were expected to prove they weren't witches. One particularly frustrating rule: you, as a midwife, had to swear an oath that you wouldn't engage in sorcery, perform abortions, or say prayers not approved by the church. You remember taking that oath. The priest who administered it looked at you like you'd already failed. You smiled anyway, because you'd still do what needed to be done, oaths or not. Let's talk about how some people viewed your knowledge, especially your knowledge of the female body. To most men of the cloth, anatomy was mysterious and frankly disgusting. They claimed women's wombs wandered through the body, real theory by the way, and that menstrual blood was toxic. So when you confidently handled labor, or told someone how to relieve a cramp with fennel and cinnamon, or suggested that a tilted pelvis might cause complications, they didn't think, wow, she's learned. They thought, that's suspicious. Weird tidbit of the night. In certain regions, midwives were banned from entering churches during specific feast days because their work was considered unclean. Never mind that you were the one keeping mothers alive while priests were arguing over candle placements. You were a woman, and you handled bodily things. That made you suspect. Now for the scholarly debate. Some historians argue that midwives were respected healers in most communities, with church suspicion being more the exception than the rule. Others point out that inquisitorial records show dozens of midwives accused of heresy or witchcraft, particularly in times of high infant mortality or plague. Who's right? Maybe both. Maybe your status changed depending on the season, the bishop, or how many babies survived that week. You remember one time in particular, a noblewoman had a difficult labor. The baby came out blue, but you coaxed it to life. The mother recovered quickly. The household was thrilled, except the chaplain. He pulled you aside, told you he'd heard you used unholy charms, that you were interfering with God's will. You wanted to laugh. Instead, you offered him your herbs and said, maybe God put these plants here for a reason. He didn't have a comeback. You walked away, but a week later your name came up in a sermon. Something about prideful women assuming divine roles. You never said a word, but every woman in that church turned and looked at you. Some smiled. A few nodded. You never stopped showing up. Because despite the whispering, people still called you, quietly but urgently. No one else could be trusted when things got bloody, not even the priests, and when people did call the church instead of you, let's just say the results were mixed. Once, a family called a local friar to pray over a woman who was in obstructed labor. He insisted that she wasn't in real pain. Eve's curse, he said. She must bear it silently. She passed out. They sent for you in a panic. You arrived, elbowed the friar out of the room, tied back your hair, and saved her life. He blessed the child afterward and acted like he'd done the hard part. That's the thing about medieval midwifery. It was a job you were trusted to do, until someone needed someone to blame. If a baby died, it was because you didn't pray hard enough. If a mother bled out, because you had unclean hands. If a child was born with a deformity, witch, they'd whisper. But when everything went right, it was God's will. You weren't asking for applause. You just wanted consistency. And sometimes you got it. In quiet thanks from grateful mothers. In girls who grew up and came to you for help when they became women. In old women who squeezed your hand and said, you delivered all my grandchildren. That was your cathedral. Not stone walls, not stained glass, but the lives you held in your arms over and over, with nothing but your breath, your herbs, and your stubborn refusal to let anyone die on your watch. You never expected to be canonized, but if there's a heaven for exhausted, underpaid, underappreciated saints, it probably smells like rosemary and warm linen. You'll meet them all there someday. The ones who whispered blessings no one approved. The ones who were accused but never stopped helping. The ones like you. You're standing in a dark, low-ceilinged room. The fire is crackling with a bit too much smoke. There's dried lavender nailed to the beams, and someone just handed you a lump of cheese as a thank you gift. You haven't slept in 20 hours. Your knees ache, and there's something sticky on your left sleeve that you don't even want to identify. Welcome to the medieval birthing chamber. It's not exactly glamorous, or clean, or even particularly comfortable, but it's where life begins and where superstition drips from the walls just as heavily as the candle wax pooling on the floor. Let's start with the smells, shall we? Imagine a thick mix of burning tallow, damp straw, sweat, wood smoke, stale ale, and something slightly metallic. Blood, yes, but also iron tools, rusted from years of damp storage in a wooden box beside the fire. Add to that the pungent sting of vinegar used to clean hands, mashed herbs like sage or rue, and the sour sweetness of honey and urine on cloths. And if you're lucky, someone also remembered to burn a little rosemary or myrrh to keep the air clean, which really just means hide the stench of panic. The air is thick, sometimes too thick to breathe without coughing, but you don't cough, you work. Because by the time you're kneeling on the floor or perched awkwardly on the birthing stool next to a woman who's gripping your hand like she wants to snap it clean off, your senses have already adjusted. You're used to the smells. They become the scent of your trade, like ink to a scribe or flour to a baker. Now, about the sounds. Nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for the sounds of childbirth. The screams, sure, but also the moans, the wails, the whispered prayers, the incoherent threats, the creaking of the birthing stool, the sharp command from a mother-in-law who swears that eating beet soup helped her birth 11 babies in 10 years, the baby's first sputtering cry, the silence before it, and the sobbing. The sobbing isn't always from the mother. Sometimes it's you. You when you realize the child is coming too fast or not fast enough. You when the cord is wrapped around the neck. You when there's no heartbeat and the room goes cold with dread. You don't show it, of course. But later, when you're alone, that's when you let it out. Into the night. Into your pillow. Into a breath that no one hears. Historical fact time. The medieval birthing room was considered a sacred and secret space. Men were usually not allowed in except in emergencies. It was run entirely by women, creating a small matriarchal haven in an otherwise male-dominated world. Inside, rules changed. You were in charge, and with that authority came responsibility. Not just for life and death, but for everything. If the birth went poorly, someone would ask if you'd closed the windows properly. If it went well, they'd ask which saint you'd prayed to. Your herbal concoctions might be praised one week and feared the next. You walked a tightrope between healer and heretic. Let's talk about the superstitions, because oh boy, there were a lot. You had to tie the woman's hair loose, never braid it. Braided hair was said to bind the womb. All knots in the room were undone, belts, laces, even curtain cords. Anything tied could delay the baby. No one was allowed to sweep during labor. It might sweep away the baby's soul. You burned a candle blessed on Candlemas. You hung an iron key above the door. You whispered the baby's name 3 times if it seemed reluctant to be born, hoping to call it into the world. And if things got really bad, you opened all the cupboards in the house. All of them. Why? Because someone, probably Agnes, the superstitious widow down the road, once said that open cupboards helped release the birth. And honestly, when the mother is screaming and the baby hasn't crowned and it's been 12 hours of labor, you'll do anything, even if it's rearranging the damn pantry. Weird tidbit. In some regions, families would bake a special loaf of birthing bread and hide a coin inside. If the midwife found the coin during the birth and pulled it out, it was believed to ensure wealth and fertility for the newborn. You found one once, bit into it by accident, nearly broke your tooth. No one tells you this job is dangerous in the mouth department. Now let's dive into a scholarly debate that still makes academics frown into their wine. Were these superstitions harmless traditions or signs of deeper folk religious systems that predated Christianity? Some say it's all just ritualized comfort. Others insist there were pagan roots in many of these practices. Remnants of ancient fertility cults and goddess worship disguised as practical customs. You don't care. You do what works, or what helps people believe it'll work. Because belief, more often than not, is what gets a woman through the night. Let's paint a little picture. You're in a cramped cottage with a leaky roof. The birthing mother is 18. It's her first. She's terrified. The room is lit by 2 candles and a tiny fire. A string of beads hangs near the bed, blessed by a traveling friar. A small carved figure of St. Margaret is tucked behind a bowl of warm water. You've placed garlic near the windowsill to ward off evil spirits. The air is thick with the scent of mugwort and sweat. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, time slows to a crawl. You speak softly, you press gently, you hum a lullaby under your breath. And when the baby finally comes, red and screaming and so very alive, you say the words you always say, like a spell, like a song. There you are. Welcome, little soul. You clean the child, wrap them in linen, place them on their mother's chest. She weeps. The grandmother claps. Someone tries to hand you another lump of cheese. You accept it. Then before you go, you do what no one else thinks to do. You sprinkle salt at the doorstep, say a quiet prayer, and leave the door open for a moment, just in case another soul is waiting to come through. It's not about whether it's true. It's about respect, reverence, tradition, and hope. Because in a world where life is fragile, where death is always a shadow away, and where women suffer in silence more often than not, hope is the most powerful superstition of all. That's why you carry dried lavender in your satchel, why you always wear that chip charm around your neck, why you still whisper St. Bridget's blessing even though no one remembers the words except you. Not because you're superstitious, but because you're tired. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the last scream is faded and a newborn breathes softly in their mother's arms, you cling to anything that might make the next birth just a little easier, even open cupboards, even birthing bread, even garlic. By now you've probably figured out that being a medieval midwife isn't exactly a fast track to wealth. No one's engraving your name into stained glass windows or composing sonnets in your honor. You're not sleeping on feather beds or sipping imported wine after a long day's work. No, you're more likely nibbling on leftover porridge beside a damp hearth while checking your linen rags for stains you hope aren't permanent. Let's be clear, midwifery doesn't pay, at least not in the way people imagine professional work should. No salaries, no contracts, no per-birth rate. Payment when it comes is unpredictable at best and insulting at worst. Coins? Ha! Rare. Maybe if you're lucky and the family's well off, or if they've just buried 3 children and are desperate enough to pay for a better outcome. But most of the time, you're paid in kind. A sack of barley, a wheel of cheese with a chunk already missing, a chicken that may or may not still be alive. One time someone offered you a homemade comb carved from bone. You still use it. Works great. Smells weird. You once got paid with a broken candle stub and a jar of lard that looked suspiciously like it had been scraped out of someone's cooking pot. You accepted it with a nod because refusing would have embarrassed the mother, and because honestly, it might come in handy for healing salves. That's the strange thing about this work. You're vital, utterly essential, yet completely underappreciated. You walk into rooms heavy with tension, catch the future in your hands, and then walk out with a thank you and maybe half a turnip. If you're really lucky, they remember your name a month later. Historical fact drop. In many parts of Europe, local parishes were supposed to contribute to midwives' compensation, but supposed to doesn't mean did. Records show that while towns sometimes recognize midwives officially, especially if they baptized infants, they often failed to pay them for their services. The church might write your name down in the town roll, but good luck getting a pension. Some midwives were smart, though. They made side trades, brewing beer, selling herbs, stitching clothes, tending gardens. You've dabbled in all of the above, not because you want to be a jack of all trades, but because a girl's got to eat. You once stitched a man's arm after he tripped into a scythe, and he paid you with a live duck. You named it Sister Agnes. It bit everyone. Now for our strange tidbit. In some remote villages, midwives were paid before the birth. And if the baby did survive, they were expected to return the payment, even if it wasn't their fault, even if the mother waited too long to call you, even if the child was born with the cord wrapped twice around its neck. You once had to give back 2 sacks of flour after a stillbirth. You needed that flour, but you handed it over. You didn't have a choice, which brings us to the hardest truth of all. Sometimes people resent you, not for doing a bad job, but for doing your job well. Because when a woman survives childbirth, when she pulls through after 2 days of labor, when the bleeding stops just in time, when the baby breathes after all, you'd expect people to cheer, to cry with relief, to throw flower petals at your feet. Sometimes they do, but other times there's a strange tension in the room, like they're not sure if they should be grateful or suspicious, especially if you used odd methods. That herbal tea you gave the mother might have been too effective. The whispered words you said as she pushed might have sounded too much like a spell. That pouch of dried herbs you hung from the rafters could have been mistaken for witchcraft. Again, you've seen it before, the sideways glance, the whispered joke that lands too hard, the priest who suddenly wants to review your practices. It's exhausting, especially when you're already working for nothing. Let's talk about the open secret in your world. The midwife's tiered social value. In wealthy households, you're treated better, sometimes. You're offered actual beds to sleep in, warm food, clean cloth, but you're still not equal. You're still a servant, expected to keep quiet and not interrupt the men. If you speak with too much confidence, you're uppity. If you're quiet, you're suspicious. If something goes wrong, you're dangerous. In poor homes, you're family. But that comes with its own burden. You're called for every illness, every mystery, every cough that won't go away. They trust you, but they can't pay you. And if you ever ask for more than they can give, they look at you like you've betrayed them. You walk between these worlds, everywhere and nowhere. And yet, you keep showing up. Not because you crave praise, but because you can't not show up. It's who you are now. You remember a birth last winter, in a collapsing cottage with no firewood. The mother was thin, the baby was sideways, the wind howled like a warning. You stayed all night, wrapping the mother's feet in your own cloak, praying softly, working until your hands were numb. She survived. So did the baby. When you left at sunrise, the father pressed something into your hand, a crust of bread and a carved wooden bead. "It's not much," he said, "but it's all we have." You nodded, you smiled, you ate the bread, strung the bead onto your necklace, and walked home barefoot in the frost. That bead is still there, still reminds you why you do this. Not for the money, not for the status, but for the mother who kisses her baby's forehead like she's discovered fire. For the child who curls his tiny fingers round yours. For the hush that falls over the room when everyone realizes, for now, they've escaped death. Now for our scholarly debate. Were midwives exploited because of their gender, or because of their proximity to pain and fear? Some say it's both. That being a woman in a woman's role gave you some authority, but only just enough to hang you with if things went wrong. Others argue that the job carried hidden power, that midwives, in their quiet, unseen way, shaped entire communities. You know the answer. You live the answer. Your influence is real. Your hands hold generations. Your presence is remembered, even if not always acknowledged. And in the rare moment someone actually thanks you, it feels like a miracle. You once helped deliver a girl with a cleft palate. The family was ashamed, ready to send her to a monastery. You stepped in, you swaddled her tightly, kissed her forehead, and told the mother, "She'll speak clearer than any of us one day." 15 years later, that girl stood beside you as an apprentice. She brought you wildflowers, paid in full, with gratitude, with pride, with love. You'll never own land, never earn gold, never sit beside kings or dine with abbots. But you'll be remembered, in stories, in lullabies, in the whispered name the baby speaks when they grow up and ask, "Who brought me into this world?" And someone, an old voice in a quiet room, will say, "She did, the midwife." You'll never hear it, but it will echo, long after you're gone. You're scrubbing your hands with ash and vinegar again, though you know it won't be enough. The blood is already drying under your nails. Your tunic smells like sweat and crushed yarrow. And outside, just beyond the warped wooden door, a man is yelling your name like he's calling on death itself. You already know. It didn't go well. The child was stillborn. The mother lived, barely. And now someone wants answers. Or more likely, someone wants a scapegoat. Guess who fits that role perfectly? You. It's a grim truth in your line of work. When the blood runs too fast, or the baby doesn't breathe, or the mother slips into a fevered sleep she never wakes from, someone always has to carry the weight. And more often than not, it's not the priest who failed to show, or the husband who delayed calling for you, or even fate. It's the woman with the hands stained in red. It's the midwife. Let's start with a historical fact, because yes, there are records. Across Europe, especially by the 14th and 15th centuries, midwives could be called before local courts, both civil and ecclesiastical. If a death occurred during or after childbirth, people wanted someone to blame. In many cases, blame was just another word for "you were there." The accusations varied. Some were vague. She caused the bleeding. She didn't pray hard enough. She arrived too late. Others were more pointed. She gave the wrong herbs. She used charms. She touched the child before it cried. You once stood before a village tribunal. 3 men who smelled of old parchment and sour wine. defending yourself after a noble woman bled out. You tried to explain the position of the baby, the exhausted muscles, the tearing that couldn't be stopped. But they didn't want explanations. They wanted a confession or a miracle. You offered neither. They fined you 3 silver coins. You didn't have 3 silver coins. So you handed over your mother's brooch instead. That was the last thing she gave you before she died. And you gave it to buy your name back. Now here's a weird tidbit. In some regions, midwives had to carry small notebooks, signed and sealed by local clergy, that confirmed their moral standing and clean record. Lose the book? Suspicious? Dirty book? Even worse. You kept yours in a waxed cloth pouch under your cloak next to the iron charm. Your grandmother once said, keeps away curses. You didn't believe it, but you wore it anyway. There's a fine line between midwifery and madness in the eyes of the law. Healing herbs become poison. Whispered prayers become spells. A touch on the stomach becomes sorcery. You once used poppy syrup to dull a woman's agony during labor. Her husband saw her eyes roll back, heard her speaking nonsense, and decided you'd cursed her. You had to explain what pain relief meant to a man who thought sneezing was a sign of demonic possession. He didn't understand, but he let you finish the birth, and the baby was healthy, so you were spared. This time. That's the thing. You're always one breath away from accusation, and heaven help you if there's a midwife in the next village with different methods. People talk. She uses basil, not rue. She prays to St. Margaret after the baby's born. She doesn't need to cut the cord. It falls away when she sings. Suddenly you're not just a healer. You're competition, and nothing fuels gossip like fear. Let's dive into a scholarly debate for a moment. Was the persecution of midwives driven more by gender politics or religious authority? Some argue that midwives were targeted as part of a broader effort to suppress female autonomy, especially women who held community respect. Others suggest it was about the church consolidating control over life and death rituals, like baptism, healing, and birth. The truth, of course, is likely both. You were a woman with knowledge and influence. That made you powerful. And power makes people nervous. Once, during a winter famine, you were called to a home where a baby had died days before you arrived. The mother was wasting away. The father was drunk with grief and anger. He accused you on the spot. You cursed us. You let my son die. You could have defended yourself. You could have screamed, but you didn't. You took a deep breath. You lit a candle. You sat with the mother for 3 nights until her fever broke. You fed her spoonfuls of broth. You wrapped the baby's body in clean cloth and buried him behind the cottage, under an oak tree. You weren't paid, you weren't forgiven, but she lived. That was enough. Still, the fear lingers. You don't walk alone at night unless you must. You don't speak too confidently in front of priests. You don't brag. You don't gloat. You keep your tools wrapped in cloth and your tongue wrapped in humility. Because the blood might stain your tunic, but it's the blame that really burns. And it comes in waves. From the man who crosses himself when you pass. From the woman who hides her pregnant belly until the last minute. From the magistrate who says your hands are too familiar with death. You've seen it before, and yet you keep answering the knock on the door. You keep showing up when the screams start. You keep bending over beds, catching slippery, screaming life in your tired arms. Because for every finger pointed at you, there's a mother who grips your hand and whispers, "Thank you." Because for every tribunal and tongue lashing, there's a child who looks up at you with wide, blinking eyes and a heartbeat that wasn't there before. Because you are not the cause of death. You are the defiance of it. You are the interruption, the resistance, the living proof that even when everything seems lost, someone still knows what to do. So you hold your head high, you clean your hands, you gather your things, and you go. Because blood is part of the job. But so is grace, so is mercy, so is choosing again and again to be the one who stays when everyone else is too afraid to. It starts innocently enough. You hear whispers, not the usual ones about witches or warding spells or that time someone swore they saw you talking to a cat and the cat nodded back. No, these whispers are different. "Have you heard?" they murmur. "There's a man now. delivers babies, says he's trained, says he studied in Paris. You raise an eyebrow. A man? Delivering babies? Trained where exactly? At a butcher's table? At first, you think it's nonsense, but then you start seeing them. Barber surgeons, men in stiff leather aprons, sleeves rolled up, hands calloused, smelling like wine and sweat and iron tools. Men who've never given birth, never watched a woman scream her lungs out in a straw bed, never soothed a weeping husband or coaxed a breech baby to turn with nothing but your fingers and sheer will. And yet, they claim authority. They carry books, Latin ones, with diagrams. They talk about instruments, metal tools they slide from leather cases like prized relics. Forceps, they call them. Or, as you like to call them, those shiny salad tongs of doom. You meet one at a city birth once, a merchant's wife, complicated labor. You arrive, greeted as usual. Then the door creaks open and in walks him, clean boots, fur collar, smug face. He nods at you like a baker nods at burnt bread. I've studied anatomy, he says. I'll handle this. You try to protest. You've been delivering babies since before this man could shave. But he's loud, confident, and male. And the husband, sweating, pacing, lets him. So you step aside. You watch him grip those gleaming forceps like a knight wielding a lance. You watch him tug, too hard, too fast. The mother screams. The baby comes out limp. He frowns, wraps it in linen, hands it off like spoiled meat. Next time, he says, call sooner. You don't say a word, but you remember. Because this is the beginning of a new struggle. Not against death, not against disease, not even against the church. This is the battle for your place. Historical fact drop. During the late medieval period and into the early modern era, male barber surgeons began encroaching on childbirth. They'd been trained, somewhat, in anatomy, often serving in military settings or apprenticing under senior surgeons. They handled bloodletting, amputations, tooth pulling, and now, apparently, babies. And they didn't come gently. They came with laws. In many towns, guilds and universities began declaring that only licensed practitioners could assist with complicated births. Midwives weren't invited to those universities. They weren't given access to those licenses. So now, the very people who'd been saving lives for generations were being told they weren't qualified. And who was writing these rules? Not women, never women. Your tools are wood, cloth, herb, prayer. Their tools are metal, sharp, loud. You hold a laboring mother's hand through the darkest hours of her life. They send her husband out of the room and treat her like a broken pipe. It's not just technique, it's philosophy. To them, the womb is a machine, something to be fixed or sliced open if necessary. To you, the womb is sacred. It's dangerous, yes, but it's also alive and deserves respect. Now for your weird tidbit of the day, some early forceps were so secret their inventors wouldn't even let others see them. The Chamberlain family in England, for instance, hid their tools in a box and blindfolded everyone in the room before using them. Imagine being the mother, half dead from labor, and someone says, "Don't worry, we'll just bring in the mystery box of metal death and pop this baby right out." No thank you, it gets worse. These men start writing books about birth, books filled with elaborate diagrams and Latin phrases and zero actual experience. And guess who can't read them? You. Because no one taught you to read. Because books weren't made for women like you. Instead, you've got knowledge passed hand to hand, story to story, scar to scar. You learned how to feel the angle of a baby's head by touch. You learned when to wait and when to act. You learned how to hear the change in a mother's breathing that means not long now. There's no chapter for that. There's no Latin word for it, but it saves lives. You remember another time, a rich family hired a surgeon for a birth, called you only after he left the mother bleeding on the floor. You found her ghost pale, her eyes rolling. The baby was alive, barely. You packed her with wool soaked in red wine and crushed nettle, tied her thighs tight, held her hand, kept her here. She lived. Later they tried to thank the surgeon. You didn't say anything. But the mother, she pointed to you. "She saved me," she said, and her voice carried further than his books ever could. Now, let's dip into a scholarly debate that's still going strong. Some historians claim male surgeons brought critical advancements to birth. They point to new tools, emergency procedures, and formalized training. Others argue these gains came at the cost of centuries of women's knowledge and often increased maternal mortality rates due to aggressive interventions. It's a messy legacy. One side gave us science, the other gave us survival. You live in that mess. You walk alongside women whose pain is dismissed by arrogant men with clean hands. You stand outside doors while decisions are made without you. And yet they still call you when things go wrong. Because deep down, everyone knows when the bleeding starts, when the baby won't turn, when the mother screams for someone who knows what it's like. They don't call the man with the sharp tools. They call you, the one with the warm hands, the steady voice, the silence that listens. This new world is coming, and you feel it pressing against you like a rising tide. But you won't be swept away. You've weathered worse. You're not just a healer now. You're a fighter, not with blades, but with memory, with touch, with the long, soft power of women who refuse to be erased. So let them write their books. Let them polish their forceps. You'll keep showing up at midnight with your satchel and your candle stub, whispering old words, catching new life, and leaving the room quieter than you found it. Because midwives don't shout. They remember. And memory, passed down, whispered, held, will outlast metal every time. It's a strange thing, how quickly the line between wise woman and witch can shift. One moment you're the midwife, the helper, the hand that brings babies into the world. The next, someone's muttering that you know too much about blood, that your herbs work too well, that you didn't just deliver the child, you conjured it. You've seen it happen, whispers turning into suspicion, suspicion into fear. And fear needs an outlet, fear needs a name, and yours will do just fine. You still remember the first time someone called you that word, witch. It wasn't shouted, just slipped into a sentence like an afterthought. "She saved the mother," a woman said, glancing toward the fire. Though I don't know what she said while doing it. You'd muttered an old prayer, one your grandmother used, half Latin, half nonsense, a rhythm meant to calm, but it was enough to make someone raise an eyebrow. You didn't respond, but you felt the shift. And from that day, you started looking over your shoulder a little more often. You weren't the only one. Historical fact break. During the late medieval period, particularly the 14th to 17th centuries, the rise of witch trials across Europe swept thousands of women, many of them midwives, into suspicion. In some regions, as many as 1 in 5 witchcraft accusations involved women known to practice healing, deliver babies, or use herbal remedies. Their knowledge, once valued, became a liability. And not because it stopped working, but because it worked too well. Think about it. You help a woman conceive after years of barrenness, and people wonder what unnatural power you used. You save a child who is born blue and not breathing, and they ask, what did she bargain for? You ease pain with herbs, and suddenly someone's convinced that no one but the devil could dull agony like that. Funny how miracles become crimes when it's a woman performing them. Let's talk about the womb. To you, it's a part of the body, complicated, sacred, finicky. But to medieval thinkers, especially men, it's a terrifying, mysterious engine of chaos. They thought it could move around the body. Yes, really. That it could cause madness, suffocation, even death. The womb was, in their view, a kind of ticking time bomb. So when someone like you, a woman already suspect, claimed to understand the womb, knew how to coax it into labor or ease its cramping or cleanse it after miscarriage, that was too much and too dangerous, because power over the womb was power over life itself. And in a world ruled by men, women weren't allowed to hold that kind of power, not openly anyway. You learned to speak carefully, to phrase things gently. It was God's will, you'd say, even when it wasn't. The saints guided me, you'd mutter, when it was actually mugwort and luck and a bit of clever positioning. Because saying I know what I'm doing could be enough to get you burned. Weird tidbit for you. There are records, actual legal records, of women being tried for witchcraft because they use butter. Not poisoned butter, not cursed butter, just butter. Rubbed on the belly to help a mother push. Apparently butter that eased birth was evidence of a pact with Satan. Let that sink in. Butter. And it wasn't just the trials that terrified people. It was the threats, the glances, the stories told in low voices by the fire. She delivered 5 babies last month, and not one died. Sounds like praise? To you, yes. To others, proof you're not natural. Let's hit a scholarly debate here. Some argue that the fear of midwives was rooted in shifting political power, particularly as male physicians and church authorities tried to claim control over health and birth. Others suggest it was cultural anxiety about women's hidden networks, those quiet, feminine spaces where midwives thrived and men were unwelcome. Maybe it was both. Maybe they couldn't stand that you had knowledge they couldn't access, that you could do what they could not. Because let's face it, no bishop ever caught a baby with his bare hands at 3 a.m. while the wind screamed like a banshee through the shutters, and the mother cried out for her dead mother, and the fire was dying, and everything smelled like blood and ash and hope. No, that's your world, and they feared it. So they tried to label it, tried to tame it, but they never quite could. Still, you had to be smart. You wore the little cross around your neck, not because you needed it, but because they needed to see it. You kept a blessed candle in your satchel. You added saints' names to your healing chants. You kept a Bible near the hearth, open to Psalms even though you couldn't read. You made your wisdom look like obedience. You made your power look like prayer. Because survival depended on it, and sometimes it wasn't enough. You remember old Madge? She lived 2 villages over, helped hundreds of women. No one could stop a postpartum bleed like her. She used comfrey and wine and, yes, a few words that weren't in any prayer book. Then one winter, a lord's wife died in childbirth. The baby lived, but they needed someone to blame, and Madge was the easiest target. You watched them drag her from her cottage, barefoot in the snow, still smelling of smoke and chamomile. You watched her stand trial, watched the priest list her sins. She talked to crows. She used bitter herbs. She delivered a child during a thunderstorm. The people who once kissed her hands in thanks stood silent. You said nothing, because you knew if you spoke, you'd be next. They burned her on a hill that spring. The flowers grew fast there. You visited it every year since. You don't bring flowers, you bring seeds. Because you're not here just to mourn. You're here to continue. You're still delivering babies, still healing, still whispering your grandmother's chants, still walking the fine line between blessing and banishment. You don't deny the danger. You carry it with you like your herb pouch, like the candle stub, like the scars on your hands from being caught in too many rushed births with nothing but faith and linen between you and disaster. And you know the truth. What they call witchcraft, you call wisdom. What they fear, you master. What they shame, you preserve. Because you are not their enemy. You are their salvation, even if they don't know it, even if they never thank you, even if they call you names as you catch their children and wrap them in cloth and whisper, "Welcome, little one," before slipping away into the dawn like a shadow. Let them fear what they don't understand. You've got a birth to attend, and the garlic's already boiling. You always hope it'll be simple. You hope for the kind of birth where the mother breathes slowly, the baby turns just right, and the only sounds are soft moans and the shuffle of feet as someone prepares warm cloths. The kind where the candle burns clean, the prayers are whispered, and the babe slides into your hands like it's been waiting for this moment. But you know better. You know some births are storms, and this night one's brewing. It starts with a knock at your door, so hard it rattles the latch. You jolt awake, grab your pouch, your cloak, your dwindling stub of a candle, and follow the boy through the fog. His breath comes out in steam. "It's my sister," he says. "The baby's early." Too early. When you arrive, the house is already in chaos. The mother is on the floor, not the bed. Someone tried to move her and failed. She's moaning. not in rhythm, not in labor, but in panic. Her eyes roll, her lips are cracked. You kneel beside her. One glance tells you what you feared. This is not going to be simple. She's young, too young, honestly. 16, maybe 17, first child, and by the look of her, she's already been in labor for hours without help. She's exhausted. You feel her belly, tight, high. Baby hasn't descended. Not good. Her pulse is fast, her hands cold. You ask the sister if the waters have broken. She shakes her head. Only blood, she whispers, a lot of it. You snap into motion. You shout orders like a general. Boil water, get clean linens, light every candle you have. Then you take the girl's hand and say gently, "You're not alone." She looks at you, really looks, and nods once. The baby's position is wrong. You can feel it. Head isn't down. Could be breech or sideways. Either way, you have to act. You prepare your hands with oil, say a quick prayer because you've run out of time for a long one, and reach in. There are moments in midwifery when you don't think. You become your hands. You feel the curve of the baby's back, the foot pressing where a head should be. You try to rotate, but the mother cries out, her body spasming around your arm. You murmur soft things you barely remember from your grandmother's teachings, but it's not working, and the bleeding is getting worse. You wrap her in linens soaked in wine and comfrey. You bark at the brother to keep the fire high. You chew a sliver of willow bark and tuck it between her teeth to help with the pain. Then, just when you think you're losing her, she clenches your hand. "I can't do it," she gasps. You meet her eyes. "You already are." And she pushes, once, twice. On the third, the baby slides free, half limp, legs first. You hold your breath. The room holds its breath. No sound. You rub its back, clear its mouth, press your lips to its chest and breathe. Once, twice. Then a cough, a wet, sharp cry, a furious, tiny scream. The room exhales. The baby is alive, but the mother, she's pale, too pale. You press at her belly. The womb is weak. The bleeding doesn't stop. You try everything, pressure, herbs, binding her thighs, whispering St. Bridget's old chant. Under your breath, like it's a spell you want to believe in, you beg, not out loud, but in your heart. "Not this one, please, not this one." She fades fast, like a candle caught in a sudden wind. She looks at the baby once, smiles, then she's gone, gone. You close her eyes, you clean her face, you press a kiss to her forehead like her mother isn't able to. And then you wrap the baby and place it in the sister's arms. "She made it," you say. "She didn't," the sister whispers. You stay the night. You help prepare the body. You light every candle. You hold the baby through the coldest hours before dawn and whisper stories you barely remember from your own childhood. Stories about saints and stars and the way some souls burn so brightly they burn out too soon. Historical fact. Maternal mortality in the Middle Ages was high. It's estimated that 1 in 10, sometimes 1 in 5, women died in childbirth, and midwives, though skilled, often face these outcomes with no real support. No hospitals, no blood transfusions, just knowledge, hands, and hope. This wasn't your first death. It won't be your last, but it cuts just as deeply. There's a part of you somewhere in the hollow behind your ribs that keeps a piece of every woman you've lost. You remember their voices, the curve of their fingers, the way they said your name when they were afraid. You carry them. You always will. Weird tidbit. Some midwives believed that if a mother died during childbirth, her spirit could linger until the child took its first steps. So they'd hang a sprig of elderflower over the cradle to bind the mother's love to the child and let her rest. You do that now. You find a bit in your satchel, hang it carefully, whispering, "Go softly, we've got her now." Now for a scholarly debate that's not easily settled, some historians believe midwives carried enormous emotional trauma from their work, what we'd now call grief, or even PTSD. Others argue that the spiritual framework of the time helped them accept death more easily. But you know the truth isn't in books. You know that it hurts, even when you accept it, even when it's not your fault, even when you did everything right. The next morning, the father finally arrives, silent, wide-eyed, stunned. You place the baby in his arms. He doesn't cry, doesn't speak, just nods. He won't remember your name in 5 years. but he'll tell the child that someone came in the dark, in the worst moment, and brought her through alive. That's enough. That's all you ask. You walk home in the rain, your cloak soaked, your knees shaking. You hang your tools by the fire, peel off your clothes, and collapse onto your straw bed face down. You sleep like the dead, until the next knock. Because there's always another, and you'll go. You always go. Not because you're fearless, but because someone has to. Because even when it goes wrong, even when it hurts, you're the only one who stays. Your satchel rattles when you walk, not because of coins, you wish, but because of everything you've stuffed inside it over the years. Bone needles, worn linen strips, bundles of dried herbs, a knife so blunt it might be ceremonial at this point, and a small wooden spoon you once used to press down a tongue mid-seizure. Some midwives carry holy water, some carry butter. You carry both. Because let's face it, you've seen too many strange births to go unprepared. People imagine birth as this noble candlelit miracle, but you know it's a battlefield, and every battlefield needs tools. Some you make, some you inherit, and some you invent on the spot because the baby didn't get the memo about coming out head first in a calm, reasonable manner. Let's start with the basics. You have your birthing stool, your most sacred piece of equipment. It's low, sturdy, has a hole cut in the middle, and has seen more action than any pulpit in town. It lets women sit upright, using gravity to their advantage. No lying flat on backs like later centuries would encourage. That's a royal fantasy. Real women in real cottages need all the help they can get. Then there's your cord knife. It's small, iron, slightly curved. You keep it wrapped in wool and bless it on St. Anne's Day, just in case. Some midwives prefer to tear the cord with their fingers. You don't. You've seen cords twist like snakes, and you'd rather have an edge on your side. And let's not forget your herbs. Oh, the herbs. You carry chamomile for calming, motherwort for uterine contractions, rue for cleansing, mugwort for positioning, and dried rose petals just to make the room smell slightly less like panic and iron. Historical fact for your sleepy brain. Medieval midwives weren't only intuitive, they had technical skill. Many knew how to turn a breech baby manually, extract a dead fetus to save the mother, and perform primitive versions of the caesarean, usually fatal, but attempted post-mortem to save the child's soul via baptism. Their skill wasn't written down, it was passed from one woman's hands to another's. Some of your techniques would raise eyebrows even today. You once blew gently into a baby's mouth before it ever cried. Not a kiss. More like a breath from one soul to another. You don't remember where you learned that. Maybe from old Brita, or maybe you just knew. There's the butter trick, too. Sounds ridiculous until you've tried delivering a child whose shoulders are stuck. You warm the butter by the fire, rub it generously along your fingers, and gently coax the baby out. Don't knock it. It's saved lives. Now let's hit a weird tidbit. In parts of Scandinavia, midwives carried a birthing stone, a small smooth pebble passed down through generations, believed to hold the luck of easy births. You laughed at the idea when you first heard it. Then you borrowed one for a difficult labor, and the child came faster than expected. Coincidence? Maybe, but you've kept a pebble in your satchel ever since. Yours came from the edge of a holy well, and you've never told anyone what it's for. And yes, there were the forceps. You shudder just thinking about them. The first time you saw a pair, they looked like fireplace tongs, cold, gleaming, made by someone who clearly had never watched a baby be born. The man wielding them said, "These will make things quicker." They did not. The mother tore. The baby cried, yes, but so did the father. You cleaned up the blood in silence. Later, the surgeon asked if you wanted a pair. You said no. You have your own techniques, like repositioning the mother, on all fours, knees raised, or even hanging from rope loops tied to beams in the ceiling. You've seen a shift in angle save a birth. You've seen a mother squat on command and bring the child out in a single scream. Let's dive into a scholarly debate you'll enjoy. Were midwives scientific or purely intuitive? Some modern scholars say midwifery lacked rational method. Others argue midwives were empirical observers before science had the words. You? You don't have time for that argument. You know what works because it works. You've seen it. You've touched it. You've adapted in the moment. Not because of theories, but because women don't have time for second drafts when they're in labor. Take that time you used a hollowed-out goose feather to clear mucus from a baby's throat. You'd read about it, or maybe overheard it at a village gathering. Either way, it worked. The baby coughed once, blinked up at you, and lived. Another time, a woman was in such pain she clenched her legs so tightly the baby's head began to swell. You whispered stories to her, ridiculous ones, about frogs who wore shoes and saints who danced with foxes. She laughed, and her body relaxed enough to let the child pass. You're not just using tools, you are the tool. Your voice, your hands, your presence. They shape the birth more than anything you carry. Still, your satchel is a miracle box. There's a needle made from bone for stitching tears. You soak the thread in vinegar. It hurts, but infection is worse. You have tiny linen dolls soaked in oil, used in cases of prolonged labor. Some say you hold the doll while praying. Others say you place it under the mother's pillow. You've done both. And once, when a mother was bleeding out and the midwife from the next village had nothing left to try, you placed one doll in each corner of the room and called it a square of protection. The bleeding stopped. Probably coincidence, but no one questioned it. There are tricks no one teaches. How to measure dilation with a knuckle. How to smell infection before it shows. How to hum just loudly enough to distract from pain. And how to look calm, even when you're terrified. There's a story you heard once, late at night, over burnt tea and a cold hearth. A midwife was called to a birth during a plague outbreak. No one else would enter the house. The woman labored alone, delirious. The midwife went in anyway, caught the child, died a week later. They buried her with her tools. They say you can still hear the click of her wooden spoon if you walk past her grave on a stormy night. You don't know if it's true, but you always check your satchel before heading to a new birth. And you always bring an extra spoon, just in case. Because tools aren't just objects. They're memory, ritual, faith. Every item in your bag has a story. The stained cloth your mentor used on her last birth. The leather strap you bite when the mother can't. The chipped bowl you mix herbs in, though it leaks a little now. You patch what you can, replace what you must. But some things you keep, even when they're worn, even when they're cursed, even when you're not sure if they help. Because they're yours, because they've been with you through miracles and messes and midnight screams, and because in a world that barely sees you, you see your tools, you know them, you trust them, and when the knock comes, when the candles are lit and the air is thick with sage and sorrow, you reach into that satchel and pull out something ancient, humble, sacred, and go to work. Every village has them. The watchers, the whisperers, the women who sit by windows with weaving in their hands and stories on their tongues. They see everything. Who visits who's suddenly looking queasy in the mornings, who's been asking about you. You walk by and they nod politely. Then, when they think you're out of earshot, the murmurs begin. That one delivers in silence. She tied 3 knots in a cord and hung it above the cradle. She asked the mother to turn east during labor. They don't always mean harm. Sometimes it's just curiosity wrapped in suspicion, like a gift you didn't ask for. But sometimes the words carry weight, and you feel it settle on your back like another pouch in your satchel. Because your world, the world of midwifery, isn't just shaped by what happens inside the birthing room. It's shaped just as much by what people say when you leave it. That's where the silent rules live. You know the ones. Don't stay too long after a successful birth. People might think you're gloating. Don't leave too fast after a stillbirth. People might think you're guilty. Don't accept too many gifts from the wealthy. Don't let the poor feel ignored. Don't correct a priest. Don't contradict a mother-in-law. Don't say, "I knew it would happen." Even when you did, you walk a fine, invisible line. One wrong step and people stop calling you. Not officially, not publicly. They'll just start going to someone else. A younger midwife, a quieter one with fewer opinions and more patience for superstition. It's not fair, but it's real. And in small communities, reputation is currency. Sometimes it's more valuable than skill. In many medieval communities, midwives didn't just exist in society. They were woven into the moral fabric of it. Their behavior was scrutinized far beyond their medical actions. Gossip alone could ruin a midwife's livelihood, leading to formal investigations or exile. Church and community councils took rumors seriously, especially if something had gone wrong. You remember once, a mother bled out after a long labor. You did everything right, but her family was powerful, and they needed someone to blame. No trial, no formal accusation, just fewer knocks on your door after that. A few cold stares at the well, and then a letter, hand-delivered by a child from a woman in a neighboring village. They say you bring sorrow. I say I need you. You went. You stayed. You rebuilt your name one birth at a time, and you never forgot what silence can cost. Now for your weird tidbit. In some villages, it was considered bad luck for a midwife to speak directly to the husband during labor. If she did, it was believed she could transfer the pain to the father, or worse, cause the baby to resemble him in temperament. So you learn to navigate these unspoken codes, nodding, gesturing, speaking through others. A dance of deference, when all you wanted was directness. Even among the women, politics thrived. The other midwives weren't always allies. Some were friends, ones who'd bring you soup after a hard night. Others were rivals. They'd borrow herbs and forget to return them, or accidentally mention your last difficult birth in the bakery line. You once confronted one, asked her why she repeated a lie about you giving dangerous teas. She smiled and said, "I just said what I heard. That's how it always goes. Words bounce, echo, change shape. You've been called a saint and a sinner in the same day." "Bless her hands," one woman said after you saved her sister. "Burn the gloves she wore," said another, after a birth didn't end well. No one remembers that you stayed until morning, cleaned the floor, comforted the mother, baptized the baby before it passed. They just remember the loss. They always remember the loss. Which is why you guard your words now. You don't speak casually. You don't gossip, even when you could. You don't share which births went wrong or who begged you to help them terminate a pregnancy. You carry those secrets like stones in your pocket, and you've seen what happens when someone doesn't. There was a young midwife once, bright-eyed, too loud, too honest. She helped a merchant's daughter, and afterward she mentioned in confidence that the father might not have been the husband. A week later, she was gone. No trial, no warning, just gone. Her cottage was empty, her herbs trampled. No one ever said what happened, but you heard the whispers, you learned. Discretion is survival, even in kindness, especially in kindness. You've kept secrets that could shatter families. You've witnessed men weep who swore they didn't care. You've seen grandmothers pray to gods they claim not to believe in. And you've stayed silent because your job isn't to judge. It's to carry. You carry the screams, the cries, the mistakes, the miracles. You carry the silence between contractions when a mother grips your hand and says, "Don't tell them how scared I was." You nod. You never tell, not even when it keeps you up at night. Let's touch a scholarly debate for your nighttime pondering. Were midwives truly isolated, or did they form powerful informal networks? Some researchers argue that midwives were solitary figures, mistrusted and independent. Others say they were part of deep female alliances woven into the social structures of care. Truth is, both can be true. You felt alone, and you felt held. There's a woman named Elspeth in the next village. She's never called herself a midwife, but she knows how to stop a bleed, how to ease a seizure, how to calm a mother who's too afraid to push. You've sent women to her before. She's sent women to you. No coin exchanged, just trust. That's the real network, not the loud meetings or the sermons or the guilds, but the silent nods, the borrowed herbs, the moments where one woman looks at another and says, "I know what you've seen." You live in a world of whispers, but some whispers are lifelines, so you walk carefully. You thank the gossips when they praise you. You ignore them when they don't. You let them talk. Because while they gossip, you deliver. While they wonder, you act. While they guess, you know. And while they mutter from their doorsteps, you walk through them, quietly, carefully, but always forward. Because your work doesn't end when the baby's born. It continues in silence, in shadows, in secrets no one else can carry. And that's why they call you. That's why they need you, even when they don't say it out loud. You know what no one ever asks a midwife? How did you learn all this? They just assume, as if the skills were passed to you by osmosis, or that you woke up one morning with the uncanny ability to guide a baby into the world and tell the difference between afterbirth and an infection based on smell alone. But the truth is, it wasn't training, not in any formal sense. There was no classroom, no chalkboard diagrams, no certificates. You were taught, but not by scholars, by women, by watching, by doing, by failing. Quietly and hopefully, not fatally. The first birth you ever attended wasn't planned. The village midwife, old Rena, dragged you along because your hands were small and your eyes were sharp. You were barely 14. The mother was screaming. The room smelled like old apples and sweat. And you nearly passed out when the baby crowned, but you stayed. And Rena noticed. That night, she handed you a cup of weak wine, a cloth soaked in vinegar, and said, "Next time you hold the legs." That was your training. Each time after that, you learned something new. How to prepare the herbs, how to tie the cord, how to massage a cramping wound, how to keep your voice steady even when your hands trembled. You never took notes. There were no notes to take. Everything was felt. Historical fact check. In medieval Europe, midwives typically learned through apprenticeship, if you can even call it that. No formal education existed. No medical schools accepted women. Their knowledge came from oral tradition, practical experience, and the collective memory of female communities. Some towns required a midwife to have a license from the church, but these were often based on character references, not exams. And let's not pretend those licenses meant much. You could be licensed in one parish and still be barred from attending births in another if a local priest didn't like your manner, or your shoes, or your face. You once walked a day and a half to attend a birth, only to be turned away at the door because a man of God said you looked too proud. You walked back home in the rain. The woman died that night. You never forgot that lesson. Now here's your weird tidbit. In some areas, midwives were said to have the hand. A kind of sixth sense passed from one to another. It wasn't a literal touch. It was intuition. The ability to know without explanation when a labor was going wrong. People believed this gift could skip generations, lie dormant, or be awakened by a crisis, whether it was real or just the result of relentless experience. You're not sure, but you felt it. That tingling at the back of your neck. That moment you know to check the cord or shift the mother or stop everything and listen. Of course, not everyone was trained like you. You've met midwives who learned from books. Barely. Others who learned from panic. Who had no guide, no mentor, just a screaming neighbor and an urgent need to act. You don't judge them. Birth doesn't wait for credentials. It crashes through the door, uninvited, and demands whoever is brave enough to stand in its way. You remember once helping a woman who'd been trained by her own mother, who had learned from her grandmother. Their midwife book was a leather bundle filled with notes scrawled on scraps of cloth, wood, and pressed leaves. There were no diagrams, just reminders like admit the poultice if fever rises and tie cord 2 fingers from belly. You read every word. It was more useful than half the sermons you've endured. Let's wade into a scholarly debate you might enjoy. Was the lack of formal training a weakness or a strength? Some argue that the absence of structure led to inconsistency, mistakes, and superstition. Others believe that it fostered adaptive thinking, creativity, and emotional intelligence, traits formal medicine often lacked. You know both are true. You've seen midwives perform miracles with nothing but warm hands and a bowl of vinegar. And you've seen others panic because no one taught them what to do when the afterbirth didn't come. But the fault isn't in the women, it's in the system that never saw them as worth educating. That built schools for men, books for men, instruments for men, and left women to piece together survival out of folklore and gut instinct. And still we survived. Still you survived. You trained in blood, in sweat, in silence. You trained by watching life come and go and learning to tell the difference. You trained by listening to old Rena mutter things like, if her breath shortens after the 10th hour, check the feet. You never questioned her. She couldn't read, she couldn't write, but she knew. One day she handed you the cord knife. Yours now, she said. No speech, no ceremony, just a passing of weight. Responsibility. You cried that night, not out of pride, but fear. You were on your own now, and then came your first solo birth. A woman named Adela, third child. Everything was fine until it wasn't. Her labor stalled. Her breathing slowed. The room turned heavy. You remembered Rena's words. Tug the hips, not the belly. Use oil if it's stuck. Speak to the baby. Sometimes they listen. So you did. You rubbed oil on your hands. You shifted her gently. You whispered, come now, little one. It's time. And he came, healthy, whole. You almost didn't believe it. When the baby cried, so did you. Not in front of them, of course. Later, alone. That night you carved a small mark into the handle of your knife. A secret tradition. One mark per life brought safely into the world. You're up to 67 now, not including the ones who didn't make it. Those you remember differently, not as failures, but as lessons written on your skin, your breath, your bones. And still, you train every day, in every moment. You watch, you ask, you change. You learn that chewing bark can stop vomiting, that tying a string around the mother's wrist calms her heart, that sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing. Just wait. Hold space. Let the body do what it knows, because training isn't a single moment. It's a lifetime. It's in the way you hum during a contraction, the way you fold the cloth before the birth, the way you walk into a home and immediately see what needs to be done. You're still learning, even now, even after all these years. And when you're gone, someone else will learn from you. The girl who watches too closely, the one who asks too many questions, the one who hides behind the curtain during birth thinking you don't see her. You'll call her out one day, hand her the satchel, say, next time you hold the legs. And the training will begin again, the way it always has, the way it always must. There's something sacred about the older midwives, the ones whose hands are stiff with age but still steady, the ones who don't need to ask because they already know, the ones who've seen it all, seen the worst of the blood and the best of the miracles, and still, they walk the same paths they always have. You don't know how many times you've seen an old woman nod at a laboring mother, say a quiet prayer, and then catch a baby in a single, seamless motion. It's as though time has folded back on itself, and every birth is just a little repetition of the first birth she ever helped with, back when she was young, when she too was learning. There's power in that, a quiet power that doesn't need to be loud or flashy. No, these women speak in whispers and smiles. They ask for nothing except respect, something they've earned through decades of service, of sacrifices made in silence. They don't ask for payment. They ask for nothing more than your attention when they speak. Because when they speak, you listen. You learn this early on. Old Johanna, the midwife who raised you, was the first to teach you that. She never had much to say, and when she did, it was always in riddles. Sometimes, she'd say, the hardest part is not delivering the baby. It's letting the mother do it herself. You remember your first birth with her. You were nervous. You were afraid of getting it wrong, afraid of failing. Johanna saw this. She saw the fear in your eyes. You'll fail, she said, her voice a soft croak from years of overuse. You'll fail at least once, but you have to understand, failure isn't what stops you. What stops you is when you decide that you're not going to try anymore. Those words stayed with you, and they always will. There's something humbling about the quiet power of women who've seen everything. Old Johanna wasn't just a midwife. She was a walking encyclopedia, a woman who knew every herb, every prayer, every folk remedy. She could tell you how to deliver a britch baby just by looking at the way a woman stood. She could feel the pulse of life, the rhythm of the birth, and she always knew when it was time to call for help, or when to trust in the process. You learned to trust her with your fears, and then one day she was gone, not in a dramatic way, not in a blaze of glory. No, Johanna slipped away quietly in her sleep, at peace with the life she had led. But for you, it felt like the end of an era. You'd lost your guide, you'd lost your anchor. But even in her death, Johanna taught you one last lesson. Her hands, those tired old hands, still gripped the needle she had carried for so many years, still rested on the linen cloth that had seen hundreds of births. Her tools, her wisdom, everything she was, remained with you. That's the thing about old women like Johanna. They don't leave when they die. They just pass their wisdom quietly into the world. And when you catch a baby with your own hands, when you feel the rhythm of a mother's body and know just when to push, just when to hold back, you know Johanna is there, still teaching. And when you carry on the work, when you step into the role of midwife without asking permission, you realize that she's not gone. She's still with you, in every prayer you whisper, in every stitch you sew, in every breath you take as you hold a newborn's tiny chest against your palm. Historical fact, older midwives, sometimes known as wise women, were often the pillars of their communities in medieval times. They were the gatekeepers of knowledge passed down through generations, their experience allowing them to perform not just deliveries, but also to care for women post-birth, handle early childhood ailments, and even deal with family issues like infertility or miscarriage. Their skills were valued, even revered, but at the same time, their independence and power made them vulnerable to suspicion, especially as the male-dominated medical field began to rise. In the villages you've worked, women like Johanna were treated with a respect that went beyond words. Yes, they were still subject to the whims of gossip, still accused of witchcraft on occasion, but they also wielded a quiet strength, one that came from years of experience of witnessing the fragility of life and understanding the importance of every moment. Weird tidbit coming up. In some parts of medieval Europe, older midwives were considered to possess the gift of foresight. It was believed that they could predict the sex of a baby, know the exact moment labor would start, or even sense if a mother would survive the delivery. Some midwives carried charms made of old iron or the teeth of animals, said to protect the mother and child. Whether any of this was true or just old wives' tales, it didn't matter. What mattered was the belief, because belief, as you know, is powerful. And sometimes the most important thing you can do as a midwife isn't to have all the answers, but to instill the belief that everything will be okay. You learned that from Johanna, too. The mother never needs to see fear in your eyes, never needs to hear doubt in your voice. You must give them your calmness, your certainty, even if inside you're holding your breath, hoping you've done enough. The quiet power of old women doesn't demand respect, it commands it. And it's that power that gets passed down. Not through words, but through actions. Through the moments when the mother, exhausted and bloodied, looks into your eyes and sees someone who knows, who has seen this 1,000 times, who knows just how to move, how to touch, how to ease the pain without speaking a word. You've learned all of this, not from books, but from the women who walked before you. Women like Johanna, women who carried the weight of centuries of knowledge of births and deaths and life in between, and who still found a way to keep going. There's a saying among midwives, you'll never know everything, but you'll learn just enough. And it's true. You don't need to know every medical fact or every possible complication. What you need to know is how to look at a woman, how to listen to her, how to be present in her moment, even if it's a moment full of blood and fear and pain. What you need to know is that you're not just bringing a baby into the world, you're bringing a woman through it. When you're old, when you're Johanna's age, you won't have the same hands you have now. Your body will ache with years of bending, of holding, of waiting, but your mind will still be sharp. Your heart will still beat steady, and your hands will still know what to do, because the quiet power of old women never leaves. It only grows. And when you pass your tools to someone else, when you hand over your satchel, your needle, your herbs, and your prayers, you'll know it wasn't just your hands that made a difference. It was the decades of wisdom passed down without a word. It was the steady, unspoken promise that the work would continue, and so it will, because you carry them with you, and you'll carry them for as long as you can. The candles are flickering low now. The room is dim, the shadows long, and you feel it. How the weight of years presses down on your shoulders. You're not the young woman you once were, rushing from birth to birth, your hands quick and sure. Now your knees creak when you kneel, your back aches after long hours, and your hands, though steady, are not as nimble as they used to be. The days blur together, sometimes as one long stretch of time with only the births to mark them, only the cries and sighs of women giving life to something new. You've come full circle. You started as a bright-eyed apprentice, unsure of your own hands, your own power. Now you're the one others come to, young women looking for guidance, seeking your knowledge, asking for that quiet wisdom you once so eagerly sought. There is something peaceful in that knowledge, something fulfilling, but there is also something bitter in it. It's not that you regret your work, not for a moment. No, the regret comes when you realize how much time has passed, how many women you've helped, how many children you've delivered, and how many have passed through your hands like fleeting moments. So quickly they seem to blur together. You can't keep them all. And that's the hardest part, isn't it? You remember every face, every woman who looked to you, who trusted you. Some you remember clearly, others, their names are gone, their faces indistinct. But the births, those, they never fade. You remember the quiet births, the smooth ones, the ones where everything went as it should. The baby came with no complications, no stress. The woman's tears were those of joy, not fear. The room smelled of lavender and clean sheets. Those were the easy ones, the ones you walked away from, exhausted, but with a smile. And then there are the others, the ones where you held the mother's hand through tears, through pain, through loss. The ones where the baby didn't cry, where the mother bled out, where you had to carry the grief as much as you carried the child. Those are the ones that linger. You remember the woman who was still only a girl, her body too young to bear the weight of pregnancy. You remember her terrified eyes, the way she clutched your hand as she pushed. Her child was born small, frail, and she died within the hour. You remember the mother who had a miscarriage so late that the baby looked like it could have been a full-term child. You remember cleaning up afterward, whispering prayers, and holding the broken-hearted mother as she wept. And you remember the ones you couldn't save, the babies who came too early, too frail to survive, the mothers who died despite all your efforts. Their faces fade in your mind, but the grief, the guilt, the helplessness that stays with you, it clings to your skin like the faintest trace of blood, the faintest whisper of a prayer not answered. But that's the job. That's the calling, isn't it? To walk in the space between life and death. To bear the weight of both. Sometimes when it's late, when the room is dark and the fire's dying, you sit alone and think about the ones you lost. Think about the moments that you can't let go of. It's in those moments that you realize this is the price of your work. It's the toll it takes on your soul. You once read somewhere that midwives are the keepers of the gateway. It made sense to you. You're there at the moment the door opens, when a new soul enters the world. But you're also there at the other end when that same door closes, when a life passes into the unknown. And no matter how much you try to prepare for it, no matter how many times you hold a woman's hand, whisper a prayer, or rub her back, there's no way to avoid the weight of it. It's always there. But so is the hope. The quiet joy of a mother finally holding her child after hours of pain. The pride in a father's eyes as he whispers his baby's name for the first time. The gratitude in a grandmother's tears as she kisses the child's tiny fingers. It's the miracle that never ceases to be miraculous. It's the reason you keep going, even when your bones ache and your heart is heavy. You've been through enough now to understand that this work, it isn't just about the births, it's about everything that comes with them. It's about being there for the mothers who need you, the families who trust you, and the babies who rely on you to catch them when they fall. It's about being the one who stands at the doorway between life and death and chooses to step through it again and again. You've seen so many lives born, So many names whispered into the world that now, even when you close your eyes at night, you can hear the echoes of their cries in your mind, and you'll carry those echoes forever. Some say that midwives have a special connection to the soul, that they can feel it, sometimes even before the baby is born. They say that the moment you catch a baby, you're holding more than just flesh and blood. You're holding potential, a whole life, a story yet to be written. Maybe that's true, maybe not. But you know what you feel when you catch that first breath, that first cry. You feel the weight of the world, and yet somehow it's light. For a moment, all the pain, the struggle, the sorrow, it fades away, and all that's left is this one tiny, perfect life. And that's enough. You take a deep breath and look at the child in your arms, the one who survived because of your hands, because of your heart, and you know that for this one moment, you did it right. You did your job. And as you hold the baby, feeling its tiny breath against your chest, you know that your work will never be done. No matter how old you get, no matter how many times your hands tremble or your legs ache, you will always be there. You'll be there for every birth and for every death, because you are the keeper of the gateway. And it is your privilege, your duty, your calling to guide the souls. No matter how many times they come, no matter how many times they go,